Gergely Orosz will lead the last discussion. He is an accomplished leader in the tech industry, having worked among many others at Skype, Skyscanner, JP Morgan, and most recently Uber. He's currently writing the Software Engineer's Guidebook full-time. You can find him online on the Pragmatic Engineer blog, on YouTube, and on Twitter. Gergely will be interviewing me. I am Karolina Toth, and I am the internal coach at Coding Sense, and also the host of the Level Up Engineering podcast. I talk with accomplished tech leaders bi-weekly at this point, and it seemed like it would be a good idea to talk about all the things that I have learned, because we will be seeing some of my former guests in the upcoming 3 days, such as Michael Lopp, Sean Fair, or Dr. James Stenier. Hi there.
Hey there.
Oh, we can hear you too. It's weird when you have to MC yourself into an interview, but here I am. Now you have taken up on the MC role, and I will stop talking.
Yeah, and we're live, right?
Right.
All right, so welcome everyone to this fireside chat where we are switching roles. Karolina interviewed me twice before on Level Up Engineering podcast, and now I'm interviewing her. So we're going to talk about learning from interviewing great leaders, and the session will of course be recorded. Questions you can ask in Hopin, and we'll have a separate breakout session afterwards to go through the Q&A. And I'm facilitating this session, so I'm Gergely, and as Karolina previously introduced me, I've been an engineer and a manager at multiple tech companies, starting from Skype, Skyscanner, and most recently Uber. So, and here we have Karolina. Do you want to do a little bit of introduction? Although I'm sure that people have seen you all day, but maybe that intro might be missing.
Right. Where should I start? I currently work for Coding Sense. It's a software development agency working with Angular and Node.js, but we basically do web application development, custom software. And I have been working in the IT industry for about 6 years at this point. After graduating from the University of Evansville with a degree in cognitive science and philosophy, I came back home and pretty much started working in IT. And I think what's relevant for this conversation is the fact that I work as a coach. So I listen to people as a profession, and I also have had multiple interactions with being an interviewer. I used to have a radio show when I was very young, in my early teens, on the Hungarian radio, where I was interviewing upcoming stars and actresses. And then I worked at the public radio in Evansville, where I was a production intern. So I had multiple interactions with just like media and interviewing people in my life.
So podcasting was not really new territory for you.
Right. It wasn't new in its own sense, but it wasn't new in the broader sense of interviewing.
So this podcast has been really successful. It's one of the, within engineering, software engineering leadership circles, it's one of the better known podcasts just because of the number, the profile of the guests that are here. We have had Michael Lopp, who's going to be on the conference here, as well as some other people. Can you tell me a little bit about how this podcast started, from the idea, how you got involved, and how it got to where it is today, where really well-known people do show up and share their thoughts about leadership and management?
Right. So before I came to Coding Sense, I was working at another tech company where I was heading up both HR and marketing efforts. So I didn't really have time to really venture out. We were doing content marketing, but we couldn't afford on my own time to just do the whole thing of creating another source of media. And when I came over to Coding Sense, there was already a marketing team, so I could just focus on our HR efforts. But the marketing team is extremely amazing at Coding Sense. Kudos to them from here. And I just kind of dropped in the idea, why don't you do a podcast? It's like up and coming, it's so cool. we have the capability, and it took me a few months to kind of convince everybody around me. And then when we arrived at the conclusion that this might be a viable kind of thing for us to do, I volunteered as tribute to host the podcast. And it turned out that our content marketer also is able to edit audio files. So we put it together, and now it's a joint effort, and we come up with the possible guests together, and we outreach to them, and some of them are kind enough to join us on the show.
That's awesome. So one of the big topics of what we're going to talk about today is learning, specifically interviewing people and takeaways that you can get away from it. But before we do, what are some surprising stories or learnings that you had, things that you were just not expecting?
Right. I had an interview with Draven from MRCIS, and he was very open and kind when sharing his experiences, and he shared somewhat of a struggle with the listeners and with me.
Sorry. So who was this in terms of, like, you worked at MRCIS, but in what role?
A VP of engineering. He was kind of higher up he is higher up in the hierarchy, and he was talking to us about how his experiences had him rise up to this role, and at one point he found himself just alone, swamped with a bunch of work, and the fact that he was not afraid to share this on the show was really amazing. And he also talked to us about how he had to put together a team for himself. He was kind of swamped with work, ready to kind of give up what he was doing, and then he talked to his manager at the time, and he said, why are you trying to make this all happen by yourself? And since then, he's put together his team of managers, and they are working together closely with him. And I thought it was a really great story about communication and being transparent about the things that you're going through. Even if you're a leader, you shouldn't be afraid of just admitting to the situation that you're in.
Yeah, it is pretty surprising, especially, I mean, in hindsight, talking about it on a podcast might be less surprising if this person does that. But I also remember both, when I struggled with the things that were going on, just too much responsibility as a manager. I think step one is just admit to yourself, and I think that's where a lot of people don't do it. This might not just be with management, but with management, you know that people are looking at you, and I. In my experience, I had maybe one or two managers who admitted these weaknesses to me, which I think only made us stronger. But it is really amazing to hear people at this level, VP of engineering or above, kind of being open about them. I don't think we see enough of that just yet. Right. I'm not sure. What is your experience with this openness with the guests? Was this a common trait you've seen, or was it some people yes, some people no?
Maybe it comes down to the fact that people are willing to come on the show and talk about themselves. But another really surprising thing that I learned was from Steve McCord, actually one of the earliest guests on the show. He talked a lot about these.
Sorry, would you mind giving a little context on who Steve McCord is? And
oh yeah, he was from Y Hotel, I think. You have to excuse me, as a preparation for this conversation, I listened to all of the episodes, and right now I have a bit of an information jumble in my head. But I think it's like episode single digits somewhere. So if you wanna find him, guys, go ahead, and gals, go ahead and just search for his name and Level Up Engineering. So he was just starting out in a new role, and he was talking about how you have to do one-on-ones, you have to talk to people, communications, building trust, and I think about 2 or 3 times in the recording he says, this seems a bit soft, like this is the software side or the softer side of leadership, and I think that's really great that the tech industry leaders come onto the show and are open about how we are not machines, we are not working with machines. And it seems sometimes stressful to go to a leadership position from an engineering position, from an individual contributor. And to me, it seems like the overarching theme is that the best leaders kind of realize how they work with people. Even if they work on software, they are making it for people, or they're making it because of people. And at the end of the day, it comes down to these really soft kinds of skills. And it's sometimes hard for us to admit to that in IT, don't you think?
Yeah, it's. I think as you progress, because when you start out, it is about coding, really, in tech at least. That's what you're tested on. That's what you need to jump through. Especially if you want to get to companies that are better known, like Google or Facebook or others, you really need to just get really good at the coding problems, because that's what you're going to fail on for the most part initially. And when you go in, also we do software engineer in their first few years, they should spend about 50% of their time writing code, in the sense of thinking about the code or doing something with it. But it's interesting because even before you become a manager, when people become senior developers, they start to realize they spend more time on the not coding side of the things, in meetings or code reviews that's related to code, mentoring people. And as you actually go to, let's say, a staff engineer or principal engineer that many companies do have who are bigger, those engineers might just stop coding. And it does become, I've observed that the biggest problems in software are usually people problems, misunderstandings, conflicts, he said, she said, and so on. So it's, but I think everyone realizes this later, and it does sound really strange. I guess maybe in tech, we might think, I'm wondering if we're just thinking that we're different because it's tech and it's new and it's never been done before. But it does seem that tech is not all that different from other industries like accounting or lawyers or you name it, HR even, that there's the industry and then there's the people, and with a big company, people, it becomes a big question mark. But it is super. I think it's great validation to hear from these people when they say the same thing as what you're seeing. So that I'm wondering if one of the big benefits of podcasts is this, because a lot of times I listen to a bunch of episodes and you don't often hear, like, I sometimes hear surprising things, but a lot of times it's just reaffirming, like, oh yeah, I thought of doing that, or I'm doing that already. Let me do that.
Right. I think it's an important point to make that. Even if you are not, like, if you're listening to the podcast and you see a couple of suggestions and you realize you are doing none of them, it is not, set in stone what you have to do. It's more like, here are some suggestions, here are some ideas to kind of inspire your mind about what could be done. And so if you do some of the things that my guests talk about, then all the better. It's like great, like reach out to us and talk to us about how these things work for you. But if you're not doing them, don't feel like you have to do them. Really, these tips are more like vectors to help you kind of find the path that you want to take when you become a leader. And even if you are not in software, I feel like in IT, it's more appropriate to somewhat make mistakes while you go, because it's a new industry, it's a new sector. We usually work on like cutting edge problems. And so the entire method of agility kind of makes us be safer in making mistakes. So we can try out a bunch of things, like if weekly one-on-ones don't work for you, try them bi-weekly. If, you are struggling with communications, try a different method, like if you have a bigger team now than you are used to having, then maybe you should start writing things down if you haven't. And these are the things that really, I think, help when you listen to the podcast, that you just get a bunch of suggestions and ideas as to what you could be doing.
And what is your take? This is a little bit different one, but a lot of the leaders that you invite, or many of them, are working at really well-known companies that are admired because either they've always been great, let's say Google or Facebook or Apple, or they're companies or startups who become great because they're doing something really well. So a lot of the leaders, this is just, I'm wondering on what your take on this, but a lot of the leaders, you might argue, they're coming from these environments where they can hire really great people. So, they can do all these amazing things that we're hearing. You have talked with other people, other organizations. Do you think, from your observation, that the practices these people do, they are applicable across the industry, or there might be some cases where you probably want to adopt it locally, or whatever? Let's say Michael Lopp might be talking about working at Slack. Maybe it won't work for if you're a small business in a different country.
Right. It's definitely context dependent, and in especially the latest episodes, quite a few people were talking about how you shouldn't be copying and pasting things that you learn on the internet. And that's true of a bunch of other things in life, not just when you listen to podcasts as an engineering manager. But I think it doesn't hurt to try. And because maybe this is like geographically more relevant to us in Hungary. I'm not making like broad observations, but sometimes people are afraid to try because they have already made up objections in their heads. And I think the great thing about IT is that there is more of a kind of freedom for you to just kind of go about your way. Perhaps it's because there are many possibilities to try when you're writing code, and maybe this is the mindset that people have when they progress into leadership roles. But I think it might be worth a shot, even if it's a copy-paste thing at first. Just communicate with your team that you don't actually know what you're doing, or not as much, but you want to try something because you heard it from Michael Lopp, or you heard it from James Tenier, or you heard it from whoever, and you can involve your team and kind of go from there together and see, there might be some parts of a new ritual that everybody loves and you should keep it, and there might be some parts that are just the exact copy-paste result and are not working for your team. I don't know.
I love it. This is my philosophy, by the way. You just described it, so I'm gonna plus one that. But you've talked with, I think, 30 plus leaders, or at least 33 interviews, and I know there were maybe one or two repeat guests. What are some traits that you've observed that great leaders do? Some things that you saw at a bunch of them, and as an expert in talking with these people and a coach yourself, what are some of the things that you might recommend leaders to see? Hey, are you doing this specific thing that, in my observation, it might help you become a good leader? Either it's a leading or a lagging indicator.
Right. That's a really, really good question, and it makes me think. I have so many thoughts about this. So first of all, I feel like you should really capitalize on yourself. I thought that most of the people who I've had the chance to talk to were extremely confident in their own abilities. And I'm not saying they were cocky, I'm saying they were confident in that they could do what they set their mind to doing. They knew they had the experience, and they knew when they didn't have the experience, so they had to be more careful when proceeding. So just capitalizing on your strengths and being self-aware enough to make decisions with confidence. I think that's one of the first things that comes to mind. And with that hand in hand, I was actually thinking about this a couple days ago, because one of the things I thought was being brave to be transparent with your team, to come out with some insecurities that you might have, to to share how the company is changing or how it's not changing, to just, try new things that you might not be so sure about. And people who know me have said this about me, that I am brave in a sense. And so I was listening to the episodes to see if it's just, like confirmation bias, like I want to hear what I already have as a belief.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, it's great if you're aware of that already. That's self-awareness right there.
right. Or if it's actually there. And in more episodes than not, people actually said, like, be brave in a sense. Maybe not with those exact words, but with how they talked about the things that they tried, or with how they talked about talking to the team, like with one-on-ones. I was talking to James Tenier, who is going to be a guest at the Stretch conference in a couple of days. He was talking about how it was very awkward when they first started doing one-on-ones, and they still sat through it. That when they set their minds to it, they said, "Okay, we're gonna be braving ourselves through this transformation of becoming better one-on-one holders or holders." Anyway, so I think it's the putting yourself out there and being confident in yourself is one of the first two things. And before we move on from this question, I really also want to share that a lot of the people who I've talked to, we are in the software industry, they were extremely keen on making the human connection. Like people were talking about
That's a
trust.
really interesting observation.
So they were talking about trust, and they were talking about, like building that rapport with their employees or with their teams. They were talking about continuous and reliable communications and making sure that their teams know that they can count on them. So just a lot of the soft things that we feel like should go without saying, but then since we're all people, we know that sometimes there are just a lot of uncomfortable things, and we shy away from hard conversations. And
yeah, and I'll tell you as a leader, that if you have a team that doesn't have problems, that's a great team, and you need all the stuff that you said: trust, transparency, etc. Usually most teams have problems that often go back to one of these. So if you can choose just one episode that stood out for some reason, which one would it be? One thing that is very memorable or you liked it a lot?
Okay, I want to say Michael Lopp because he's great, and I want to say James Tenier because he's also great, but I want to say all of the episodes were pretty great. But I have one, and I want to say that Ryan Nystrom is also great from GitHub, but I have one that I have a bunch of favorite episodes, but I have one episode that I really think is an outlier in the sense that we talked about a concept, anti-fragility, with Adam Wolf. He is, I think, also VP of Engineering at Robinhood. And this was very satisfying to me as an academic because we were talking about these concepts and how to apply them. And it also satisfied me as a professional in the industry because we were very pragmatic about the stuff. Like, how do you apply this? Why does this matter? What does this mean to our teams? And just very quickly, anti-fragility is basically the concept that some teams or some things are becoming stronger because of stress. And the easiest idea to kind of wrap your head around it is muscles. Like, you stress your muscles and they become better and stronger and bigger. And so in that episode, we talked about how you can do this to your team, or how we might think you can do this to your team. And, I am just hoping that that episode really made people think about the stresses that they have experienced or how they have worked together, and maybe it helps everybody have a different kind of perspective on the not so great things that happen to us.
And that's a really good point, because one of the conventional wisdoms, if you look at any management book, saying shield your team, make it predictable, have a little stress. But I'm actually going to listen to that episode. I haven't done that, because sometimes some of the best experiences, looking back, the most bonding ones, were stressful. So I'm actually going to go back to that. With that, we're at time. So one last question. There's a bunch of episodes. How would you recommend finding which episode to listen to? We don't have all the time. Everyone's on this call is very busy. They might have time for one or two. How do we find it from the expert?
I can always just say, like, go backwards, and if you screw up, you can start from the beginning. But I don't want to say that. I want to say, if you are unsure about something, then look for the episode that speaks to whatever you are unsure of. But I want to say it's not the golden source of truth. It's more like really an idea. So I would recommend that you more so listen to it as an extra. I want to say that you shouldn't be researching the fixes to your problems through the podcast. I feel like it should be a single data point, and you should listen, and you should observe what kinds of things really speak to you as a leader, and take those ideas and research those ideas a bit more, or get in touch with my guests. They all seem to be very open to engaging with people. And so I want to say it's not like a knowledge transfer. So I don't think you should view podcasts as like you would read a self-help book, or like you would read the algebra book from college. It's more like when you go to the movies, you're looking for a new experience. You're looking for new ideas. And you also want to have fun. And I feel like the episodes are kind of fun. Like, my guests are funny sometimes, and we have great conversations. And they also share knowledge, which you can take away with you, but you shouldn't be expecting, like, lists of things that you should do. If you want that, read a book. This is more of like an entertainment, which is also informational and very good for you to like progress in your career. But
I'll add that I think the human side is nice. It's nice to see that other people, they're not perfect, even though they're in positions that I think a lot of us wouldn't mind being there. I'll just put it like that. But they're people, they're relatable. That's one of the biggest takeaways that I have from these ones. And you can get ideas, and sometimes you might think I could do that better, and maybe you should try.
Right, and reach out and share your experiences.
Nice. Well, Karolina, this was fantastic interviewing you, returning the favor, and it's been a really nice experience. So so to close it, I know we're going to have a Q&A. Do you have any advice on where people interested in Q&A should go to?
Yes, we are going to have a Q&A in the sessions, but it's not going to be the two of us, I assume. It's I'm going to kind of end our presentations here and talk to you about the upcoming days, and then at the end of our day we will have all the Q&A sessions where you can also talk to us about whatever questions you might have, but the sessions will be organized by Toth, but I will talk about this in a couple minutes because I have Medea Bacifava with me here. Thank you, Gergely.
Hello, guys.
All right. Thanks very much.
Wait. Gergely, don't go.
Oh,
I have
I'm here.
a present for you guys as well.
Oh, look.
Oh, amazing. Oh my gosh, amazing.
I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of looks like you. And
that's amazing.
How nice.
All right,
Thank you so much.
We'll throw it over, and I'm going to somehow grab that. All right,
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So go ahead and go for the section. Bye-bye.
Bye.